Welcome to Joy Meets World. I'm your host, Joy Yuki, and on this podcast, I'm sharing my adventures traveling around the U.S., visiting national parks with my dog, Quincy. Today, I'm going to be talking about my trip to Lassen Volcanic National Park. If you've never heard of this national park, you're not alone. I was barely familiar with it myself before planning this trip and before visiting it. It is in Northeast California, along the lines of the Sierra Nevadas, north of Yosemite, which is where I left off. I was staying near Yosemite in a little town called Cathy's Valley, and I drove 6 hours pretty much northeast, which is about 305 miles, to a tiny little town called Westwood, California, which is about 40 miles from Lassen Volcanic National Park. And that's where a lot of my story about my visits to the park is actually going to be, at this RV park. Many adventures were had there. This RV park, it wasn't my first choice as an Airbnb, but the one that I had originally wanted got booked too fast, and so this was the next one in the area that was in a reasonable price range, or so I thought. And honestly, it would have been a great stay, just for a couple of things that did not go my way. So I checked in the evening on a weekday, I want to say Tuesday, and the manager of the RV park met me and walked me. It was actually a cabin that they had there, sort of like permanent trailer. It was nice. It had a really nice kitchen, for a trailer, and it had a wood stove going when we walked in, and it felt so warm and cozy. Now, you've got to understand, in that part of California at this point, late February, that it is 30 degrees outside during the day, snowing, or, at least the ground is covered in snow. So it's cold. And so walking into a warm space is really, really nice and comforting. He showed me around the place, and there was the wood stove going. There were 2 electric heaters. And then he mentioned on the way out that the central heating wasn't working. And he said, it normally is working and they're getting it fixed. They're just waiting for a part to come in. And I didn't really think about it because I was just tired and just wanted to get everything unloaded, get settled for the night. And at that point, it felt warm, so I wasn't really thinking about it. So overnight, of course, the wood stove goes out because you go to sleep and, you can't keep up with it. So it goes out, and the electric heaters that were set up were not putting out enough hot air. When I felt them, there was definitely hot air, but it was not nearly enough to keep up with the cold. And eventually I found out later I had gone down to 3 degrees that night. And it was cold. It was cold in that space. And that's from somebody who sleeps extremely hot. I'm just usually very hot. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm very hot at night. And so the cold usually doesn't bother me at night. But I was freezing. I could barely sleep that night. So I wake up in the morning, I light the wood stove again, which is a difficult task in itself if you're not used to doing it. And I go to make myself some coffee and to use the bathroom, and the water doesn't work, which I knew right away the pipes had frozen because it was so cold. And it just hadn't been top of mind for me to keep the water dripping. Maybe it should have been. Nobody told me to do that. And as you know, the RV park manager had not said anything to me. He had even walked me through the space. So, of course, right away, I messaged my Airbnb host, let them know what's happening. I also forgot to mention that the internet wasn't working, so I tried logging on the night before, and I could not connect. My phone definitely could not connect to the internet. My computer would about maybe every 5 minutes, but then it was very slow and spotty, which in my line of work, I do all my work online, so that was not going to be ideal. So I had already messaged them about that and gotten no response. Messaged them in the morning about the water and the heat and got no response. And so basically, I sat in the space because I had gotten up around 5 a.m., sat in the space until I want to say around 10 a.m. without a response from my Airbnb host. Somebody had shown up and was banging on the pipes outside my space, but nobody came and knocked on my door. Nobody messaged me. There was no communication. So at that point, of course, I have to go to the bathroom and I want my coffee and the internet's still not working. So I need to, get to a good internet connection. So I wait for the fire to die down, which is a very hard thing to do when you're cold. And I leave and find the nearest Starbucks, get myself some coffee, get warmed up in my car, took Quincy with me. And I had looked up that this RV park, the office hours opened at 10 a.m. So I had left her right before that, got to the Starbucks, got settled, and then called the office since they weren't responding. They did pick up the phone and they acted surprised to hear from me. They just, I guess, thought that, I don't know what they thought, that it was fixed, or that, I don't know. They just didn't really give me a response to that. So I just asked them, I just told them point blank that the water is still not fixed. The heat isn't working, the internet's working. So they said they were going to send somebody back out to look at the water. But again, this whole time they haven't offered me an alternative, like for drinking water, for the bathroom. It's been 5 hours, right? Like, you should offer your guest another way to access water, and they haven't done that. And on the call, they didn't do that either. I asked them directly about the internet. There had been a fire. The Dixie fire is actually in that whole area, and I saw it driving up there, and then on the way to the park later on. I mean, the devastation is everywhere. So they just said that, the fires had taken down the internet essentially, and they've been like really struggling with getting internet for the past 6 months, which is totally understandable, but that's not fair to tell me after the fact. Like, that should have been in your Airbnb listing that internet was going to be spotty. So she said she was calling and trying to work on it, but essentially the gist was, I'm not going to have internet. And then the heat thing was, I guess, the most surprising. And she said, I just told her, like, it's that you have to give me some more electric heaters because this isn't going to fly at night. It gets way too cold. And she said, which would be pretty simple, like, just take it from another unit and bring it over to me. I don't know. But she said that what I should do is to turn on the burners on my gas stove and leave them burning all night. And that was her solution to the heat problem, which seems insane to me. And I verified that with several sources. Thank you, Dad, and thank you, Jennifer and Robert Finlayson, for confirming that for me, because I was pretty stressed and pretty cold at that point, and so I wasn't thinking the clearest. So I went back because they showed me the water was fixed, and it wasn't, and I called them and told them. Internet still wasn't working, and so I just decided, with the support of my friends, my family, Lauren, thank you, that I just was going to leave and find another Airbnb, which I did. And I'm so thankful that this Airbnb about 30 minutes away took me in right away. They responded to my request right away. They took me in right away. So we essentially packed up and left literally right as I was walking out the door. The water got fixed. It got turned back on. But the internet still wasn't fixed, so there wasn't a good solution to the heat problem. So I just left. I let them know. They were apologetic. But the new place was in a little town called Susanville, which is about an hour from the parks, a little bit farther, but it was right on the banks of this creek. Oh my goodness, the deck went over the creek, so it sounded beautiful. It had central heat. It had, I had great internet, had all the amenities, so it was really, really nice to have that. And then it had been over 24 hours, so I couldn't get my money back on the first Airbnb, but they did refund me my money. So I'm grateful for that. It was definitely an adventure, an Airbnb adventure, but we made it through, and I'm really grateful for my friends and my family who were so responsive and so helpful. Jen, my friend Jen, who books all my Airbnbs, she jumped on it right away and found me a new one, and just was so supportive of me changing Airbnbs and being safe. And I'm glad I made that decision. I'm glad I have friends like that. I did get to go to Lassen Volcanic National Park. And I can't wait to tell you guys about this park because it is so, so interesting. A lot of these parks in Eastern California, I would love to revisit in the spring and the summer when it's warmer because, as I've said before, a lot of their main roads are closed during the winter. Even if they had a pretty warm winter, they're going to close those roads no matter what because they're just not going to plow them. They're just not going to deal with that during the winter, so they just stay closed. And that means you can't see a lot of these parks. So that was the case with this park. It was, the main road in was plowed up to the visitor center, but literally everything else was unplowed and covered in snow. So there wasn't a ton to do at Lassen Volcanic. There were a lot of snowshoers. There was a lot of kids and families sledding at the park. And there was one attraction that was open that I got to do that was just wild. So you hiked up on the snow about a mile to kind of, I wouldn't say the top of a peak, but it was definitely an uphill climb. And at the top was these hydrothermal vents called sulfur works or sulfur pots. And essentially it is these small pools of liquid that are boiling, like huge boiling bubbles and smoke coming up from them. It's like what you would think of as a hydrothermal vent. And they're at the foot of this mountain. So the craziest thing about it is you're walking through like who knows how many feet of snow, 10 feet of snow, right? For a mile. And then you get to the part where the hydrothermal vents are and it goes down to just plain road, just completely plain road for probably like 25 feet where the hydrothermal vents like are on either side of the road and under the road. And then you're back to like 10 feet of snow. So they literally are so hot. They're like, no snow can stay in that part, which is crazy to see. The hydrothermal vents, the sulfur works, yes, they smell horrible. I walked up to them to take some pictures and look closely and do a video, and I started gagging. So that was about it for the sulfur works. I have the videos and pictures to remember them by, but it was disgusting. Horrible, horrible smelling. and also mind-blowing that they look and smell that way. And that whole concept is going on in this park. So essentially they're there. They're the last kind of vestiges of a volcano that was Lassen Volcanic National Park, right? So essentially magma still lies below the surface, and that is what is heating and causing these hydrothermal vents and these sulfur works to be on the surface. And the sulfur works themselves, that area of the park, they think was the central vent for the volcano. So if you kind of take a panorama of Lassen Volcanic National Park, it's surrounded by mountains, and it's essentially just this big basin. And those mountains used to form, and the basin used to be a part of just one big mountain that erupted as a volcano, and the middle kind of, blew out as volcanoes do. And so the basin was left, and then all this ring of mountains around it is just all that remains, and these hydrothermal vents, because there's still a little bit of magma under the surface, which is crazy to think about. But it is, there's just views everywhere. Views for days. Like, the mountains are just so beautiful, and the hike in the snow was different. You don't often get to do that. It's definitely, I forgot how excruciatingly more challenging a hike in the snow is, even packed down snow, like the snow I was walking on, how many calories you burn. Like, it is a workout to walk in the snow, to hike in the snow. So all around, it was perfect. It was so interesting to see in the winter and to see those sulfur works. I would love, again, to go back at a warmer time when the roads are open, because there are a lot more hydrothermal areas, and they're all different from each other. They all have different features, and I think that would be neat to see. I think there's, a lot of hiking that you can do in the warmer months around those mountains that make up the park. So I would definitely go back in the summer to see them. Lassen Volcanic National Park is in a county called Lassen. There's a town called Lassen, and it's all named after a pioneer who settled that area. I think his name was Peter Lassen, which, again, is a big trend in the Sierra Nevadas and Eastern California, especially, it's either named after a pioneer or a gold rush kind of hero or well-known figure of the gold rush. That's what I've come to find about these counties and these towns in Eastern California, which is really neat. That is all for my adventures in Lassen Volcanic National Park. Next time I will be in the Redwoods, back in the western coast of California, just in the Pacific Northwest this time, and I can't wait to tell you about that trip. Until then, subscribe to this podcast, rate and review it. I would be so grateful. You can always follow me on YouTube at Joy Yugi and watch these if you prefer. And if you have any comments or questions about the park, I always post on Instagram. You can find my handle, Joy Yugi. I have a reel for each park that I do, and, it's so easy to send me a message or to leave a comment on there, or a question on there if you have one. I would love to hear your tips if you've been to the Redwoods, or any of these national parks, really, what you would recommend to do, or if you are curious to know anything about it, and we can start a conversation there. So thanks for listening. Until next time, I wish you happy travels wherever life is taking you.